Good morning, everybody. How's it going? Good to see everyone. Just about a minute and a half, then we'll get everything underway. Hey there, guys. AJ, Roheen, Nicole, John. Good to be with you guys. Kayla, Monica. Good morning, everyone. Kazi, Fernando, Caleb, Brianna, Jesse. Welcome back. Hey, Ryan and Sky. How's it going? Nice. Cool. So, good to be with all you guys today. Hope you're having a good week and a nice morning. Today we're just going to continue going through more of our fallacies in chapter 5. So it's pretty much 8:30. I'm getting things rolling. So chapter 5 is all about the topic of fallacies in reasoning and within arguments. So fallacies, as we were talking about Tuesday morning, are when there's a logical error or a flaw inside of an argument. And when it has this type of flaw, it makes it a weak, ineffective argument where the premises don't give the right kind of support to the conclusion. So essentially, fallacies are bad, defective, flawed arguments, but we have to be able to recognize when these fallacies exist and what the definitions of the fallacies are so that we can call out fallacious arguments when people make them, and so that we can kind of prevent ourselves from sometimes lapsing into fallacious reasoning and rhetoric. Okay, so we began with the first category of fallacies on Tuesday, which I told everyone those are called fallacies of ambiguity. So the other two to start our meeting right now, and then after that we'll move on to a new category of fallacies. Those are called fallacies of relevance. So those are the two main goals for today's meeting: to finish up fallacies of ambiguity and to get as far as we can through the next batch, which is a group of 8 fallacies of relevance. And as always, it's good to be with you guys today. Yesterday was my birthday, but it wasn't exactly like a exciting birthday, just middle of the week, a lot of grading, a lot of teaching. But anyway, nice to always have another year. So let's just get back into it, guys. Okay, I'm going to first review a couple of the fallacies that we covered on Tuesday, just to kind of refresh your memory. And we'll quickly talk about those, then I'll add some notes to the board from there. As usual, if you are here, find time at some point to leave some kind of comment behind, just so that I can keep track of who's been attending and all that. Oh, thanks, Ashley, and yes, everyone else. That's I really appreciate it. Okay, so fallacies of ambiguity. What the fallacies of ambiguity are when an argument has ambiguous words, sloppy grammar, or some type of confusion between related concepts. And so the essential flaw within this category of fallacies is the concept that something's ambiguous in there. And one of them, the first one we talked about, is equivocation. What's equivocation? Equivocation is when there's a key term inside of the argument, but the problem is that it's used more than once, multiple times, and with different meanings. So it's when you have a key term and the meaning of it changes throughout the course of the argument. Like if somebody said, let's see, John went to the bank, and the bank is where you can deposit money. So John went somewhere where you can deposit money. Apparently it looks like it's valid, but if we specify that the word bank has been used in 2 different ways with 2 different meanings, then in that case, the conclusion wouldn't follow. Like if, for example, the first premise refers to the bank in the sense of the food bank or the bank of the river, then the second premise, which is clearly referring to a financial type bank, the conclusion wouldn't follow because we've used the word in different senses throughout the different premises of the argument. Imagine if someone says, if they love me, then they'll, let's see, if they love me, then they would do anything for me. And because this person has never told me that they do love me, and therefore they'll do anything for me. In this case, I don't know, the first premise, if someone loves you, they'll do anything for you. That means like if you're really connected and bonded. And the second premise, we've switched love from just that kind of connection to any kind of relationship whatsoever, and therefore the conclusion probably wouldn't follow. So when you have words that sort of are the focal point of an argument, we have to make sure that we retain the same univocal meaning throughout and that we don't equivocate on the meaning of that term. Okay, so then next up there's amphiboly. Amphiboly is the fallacy of grammatical ambiguity. So with an amphiboly fallacy, the problem is that there's a grammatical mistake in the argument which allows more than one conclusion to be drawn, and that's why it's ambiguous. So like if we say that Bill and Ted were talking about his time machine, we don't know whose time machine is being referred to because the two male subjects are being referred to ambiguously as his. And so to whom does this pronoun attach? It's not clear in that case. The photos were taken of the malnourished natives, but they were underdeveloped. This could refer, they, the plural pronoun they, to the photos which were not developed in the lab, or it could refer to the images captured by the photos of the natives, which were perhaps malnourished and therefore underdeveloped people. So anyway, grammatical ambiguity, that's amphiboly. And then one more that we talked about last meeting, that was the fallacy of accent. The fallacy of accent happens when the meaning of an argument or a statement changes depending on which word or phrase within it is given an emphasis or a stress. So like we gave this example of the mother being upset with the daughter for burning down the shed, saying to the daughter, "Why did you do this? I said specifically don't ever play with matches." And the daughter fires back with, "Yeah, I know, but that's the thing. I wasn't playing with matches. I was doing science experiments with these matches." Now, of course, when the parent says don't play with matches, the real message is don't do anything with them, don't touch them, don't light them. But by adding accent to the word play, the child tries to transform the intended meaning of the original rule by the parent. Okay, so then there's two more fallacies of ambiguity. So that was a little review. Let's just wrap that section out. Two more fallacies of ambiguity. Okay, so one of them is called fallacy of division. And then the other one is called fallacy of composition. So okay, so division and composition. First of all, the division fallacy. Let me get my book open really fast. So one erroneously infers from a characteristic. Let me say this, actually. I don't like the way the book has said it. That's why I was kind of studying their wording. I think it's too confusing the way they put it. So one erroneously infers that a characteristic of a group is a characteristic of each member of the group. Okay, Okay, so we're going to get fallacy of composition in a minute, but I just want to clear the board so I can write and discuss this a little bit more. So there you go, fallacy of division. This says one erroneously, so meaning in error, one does this in error. One incorrectly infers that a characteristic of a whole group is a characteristic of each member of the group. Okay, so sometimes a person may assume that because a group or a whole has a certain feature or quality, that every single member of that group has the same quality, but this is not always true. Sometimes the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, as some say, and that can be a situation where although the whole has a feature, we do not see that same attribute or characteristic in every single element of the whole. So like the form that the division fallacy has is this form. So the overall structure that such a fallacy takes is that someone begins with the premise that some group has a characteristic. So let's just say group G has characteristic C. Okay, so group G, I'm just labeling it with the letter G because it could be whatever example. It could be like a family, it could be a nation, it could be a hotel room, or a hotel. So whatever, the group, whatever it is, has a certain characteristic trait, C. C is also just a placeholder for whatever the given example is. So group G has characteristic C. The second premise would merely then add to that some individual X is a member of G, of that group. So if group G has characteristic C and there's something that's a member of the group, the erroneous inference is that that individual member also has the characteristic C. But that's a fallacy. Okay, so let me explain some examples as to why this is a fallacy. So here's one that's referred to in the book. Say the group men, right? Men are taller than women, like just average height, and that's just a fact. If you just look at the statistical facts concerning height, on average, men are a little taller than average women. So men as a group have this characteristic, taller than the average woman. So then let's choose one individual man. In the textbook, they give the example of Danny DeVito. I don't know if this Hollywood actor is so familiar to you, but he is a regular appearing character on It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. He had a lot of movies back in the 90s and 80s even. But he's very short, okay? He's 4'11", I think. So suppose we say that men are taller than women. Danny DeVito is a man, and therefore Danny DeVito is taller than the average woman. That would not be a correct conclusion, right? Because although men as a general fact, as a group, if you take them as a holistic whole, are taller than women, that doesn't mean that every single individual man that you could pick out from that group has the same feature seen in the group at large. Okay, so Kevin Hart is a man, so Kevin Hart is taller than the average woman. Obviously not necessarily true. He's another short guy, but he's a little taller than Danny DeVito. Okay, and we could use other examples with the case of gender. I don't know, like men make more money than women in the United States, which is perhaps a reflection of inequality that we still are trying to work on. But anyway, men make more money than women even for the same kind of work. So suppose then my dad is a man. So therefore my dad makes more money than my mom, but that's not necessarily true. So you can have an individual household where the woman is the higher earner, of course, even if as a matter of the general facts, men make more than women. So another example there. Let's see. You could point out that like a team is a really great team as a whole, like in sports. I don't know. I know the Lakers are struggling at times right now with Anthony Davis, sidelined. But suppose that a person makes the argument that because they're, the champions at the moment, the Lakers are the best team in basketball. And then you just say, I don't know, like Alex Caruso is a member of the Lakers, so therefore he's the best player in basketball. Not necessarily. No disrespect to Caruso or whatever. He's got flair and he's got the headband, but probably arguably he's not one of the most elite players in the whole league. Nonetheless, you see the form of the fallacy, right? Just attributing to the individual member a quality that the group has as a whole. Okay, so Sometimes people who reason in ways of thinking about stereotypes and stuff will commit this fallacy. I don't want to repeat any negative stereotypes because I just think they're not fair. But sometimes people have, I guess, positive stereotypes that are kind of complementary. So one of those that the book uses is this: the Canadians are nice, which I guess that's a cultural stereotype of the Canadians, that they're very friendly, helpful, willing to go out of their way to give people, assistance, whatever. So suppose that's the argument. Canadians are generally, the group Canadians are nice. Derek is a Canadian, so therefore he must be nice. Not necessarily. I mean, of course, you can have a group with a certain kind of characteristic reputation. Not necessarily every member of the group has the same. In the same way, we could say that the Vulich family is loud and boisterous. So I'm not saying that's true, but suppose you're a part of a family that's very loud. You guys, when you get together, everyone's loud and kind of talkative. And then one member of the family is obviously a member. Does it mean that that one member is loud just because the family as a whole is? Again, not necessarily. And I'll just throw one more out there to kind of really just cover all the bases. Take the group United States. The United States is the wealthiest nation in the world. That's just true. So the United States is the wealthiest country. You are a member of the group United States. Let's say you're one citizen of the United States. So therefore, you're the wealthiest person in the world. Not necessarily. Again, obviously, you can be a part of a system which has a massive and impressive wealth without every single part within the system having that wealth too. Okay, so hopefully that makes decent enough sense. That's fallacy of division. So now that that's all clear enough, we're moving to the next one, which is called fallacy of composition. And then that's the last from the previous group, fallacies of ambiguity. The fallacy of composition is kind of like the reverse of the fallacy of division. So it has a similar kind of structure, just going the opposite way. What the fallacy of composition says, so I'll write it here. So in this case, a characteristic of a member of the group is erroneously assumed to be characteristic of the whole group. Okay, so you can see it, I hope. It says fallacy of composition. A characteristic of a member of a group is incorrectly, erroneously assumed to be a characteristic of the whole entire group. And if you were looking at the form that this type of fallacy takes, it takes this general form. So the first premise of such a fallacious argument would be, so some person X is a member of group G. Second premise, X has characteristic C. So therefore, group G has characteristic C. And again, that's not always valid. Okay. So just the structure and form of this type of fallacy. So suppose that I tell you that room 101 is one of the rooms in this big hotel. Well, I shouldn't even say that yet. Let me just restart again. Room 101 is one of the rooms of the hotel. Room 101 is small. So therefore, the hotel is small? Not necessarily, right? I mean, you can have a big hotel that's composed out of a bunch of small rooms. So just because individual parts of the whole are small. Doesn't mean that the whole thing is. In a similar sense, let's consider the elements that form the mass in my body. So I'm talking about the individual atoms that aggregate to form the physical object that is my body. So an atom in my body is a member of the mass that forms me, and that atom is invisible to the naked eye. So if you wanted to look like at one of the atoms that is a part of my body, you would have to look at it under a electron microscope, because you just can't see atoms with the powers of the human eye without some kind of magnification. So one cell or atom in the body can't be seen without a microscope. Does that mean that the whole body, which is the aggregate collection of all those atoms, cannot be seen without the naked eye? Of course not, because as you can tell, you're looking at me right now with the naked eye. So just because each atom can't be seen without a microscope doesn't mean that the whole body cannot be. Other examples, I don't know. Say that, take this case, which is also mentioned in the book. So sodium is very dangerous to human health by itself. Chloride is also highly dangerous to human beings by itself. So therefore, the composition of the two, sodium chloride, therefore must be very dangerous to human beings. But no, sodium chloride is just a scientific name for salt, NaCl. So these two elements of the periodic table, when they are combined together, they form this composite that's not deadly at all. So just because the individual elements within it are harmful does not mean that the thing which is formed by a combination of them is. So sometimes, we make these type of errors in reasoning, either associating qualities of an individual with the whole group that they're a part of, and that's not always true, or in the reverse, associating with an individual a characteristic that only the whole group does have. Okay, so we just have to try our best to avoid falling prey to such fallacious reasoning and not to lapse into it ourselves. So now that's all that for the fallacies of ambiguity, and we can start fresh with the next category, which is the plan for the remainder of today's meeting. So fallacies of ambiguity are now all in the books. That's equivocation, accent, amphiboly, division, and composition. 5 of those. So now it's on to the next group. A second group of fallacies that we're now going to study are called fallacies of relevance. So let me just change my notes. Sorry, it's a little hard to get over there, but anyway, it says fallacies of relevance. Okay. Now, what is the overall definition of this category? What makes these different fallacies fit within the same group? In fallacies of relevance, one or more of the premises of the argument is irrelevant to or is unrelated to the conclusion. Okay, so when one or more of the premises in the argument is unrelated to or is irrelevant to the conclusion. Fallacies of relevance. When one or more of the premises within the argument is not relevant or is unrelated to the conclusion. So clearly, if an argument has this flaw, that's a problem, because the premises are supposed to be related to the conclusion. Obviously, the premises are the evidence that's supposed to prop up and support and back the conclusion. But if the premises are unrelated to it, or they have nothing to do with the conclusion, or they're somehow irrelevant to that conclusion, then that's not the right kind of evidence to give in support of the conclusion. Now, like I said, fallacy of relevance is not the name of a fallacy, it's the name of a category of fallacies. Just like the word mammal is not the name of a species, but a classification of species. So what are the individual members of the fallacy of relevance category? Okay, so there's 8 of them. I'm going to list the names of them here, and then we'll try our best to cover all of them, or as many as we can with the remaining time we have. So what are the 8 members of the Fallacy of Relevance clan, if you will? Here's what they are. So you've got personal attacks, appeal to force, appeal to pity, okay, the 4th one is popular appeal, 5th, there's appeal to ignorance. Okay, and there's 3 more, so I'm going to write them over on this part. Next one, we've got hasty generalization. And 2 more, straw man and red herring. Okay, so these 8 fallacies of relevance, that's the major goal for us to try and cover today. The second homework assignment, by the way, if you look in our syllabus, it will be due next week, late in the week. It's designated for Thursday, a week from today, that's the 25th. And that homework assignment is a workbook exercise from the textbook, which involves these fallacies of relevance. So this lesson on fallacies of relevance is important for that homework assignment. If we cannot complete all 8 of them today with the time that we have, then I'm thinking I'll just slightly modify the due date, not that much, just pushing it out to later in the same week. So like you could submit it to me before midnight or something on Friday of next week. If I do need it to talk about a couple of these at the beginning on Tuesday, that'll give you a little bit of margin of extra time. It's not a very hard homework assignment in a way. All that it requires from you is to look at a list of written argument fallacy examples and identify which one it is, and then just write the name. Just tell me, is this popular appeal, appeal to ignorance, or whatever, or appeal to force, personal attack. Okay. So let's just begin and go through these. The first one in the list is the personal attack fallacy. So we're starting with that, and we'll take on the rest as we go through it. So I'm going to erase the whole board, and we're going to zero in on this one for the moment. Okay, so the first fallacy of relevance, just so that we know, these are all fallacies of relevance. So I'm just going to leave that header at the top without the definition. And the first one then we say is personal attacks. Okay, personal attack fallacy. One quick thing to say or to mention is that the personal attack fallacy is also sometimes called by another more formal sounding name, a Latin name that goes back a long ways. So, I mean, all these fallacies have been discussed and analyzed over really thousands of years. So none of this stuff is brand new, but the personal attack fallacy, if you go way back into the original Latin name of it, it's called ad hominem. And so I'm just going to put that in parentheses below so that you're aware that sometimes this will be referred to and is referred to as the ad hominem fallacy. Ad hominem in Latin means to the man or to the person. So it's supposed to stand for the idea that you're not really replying to the argument. Now you're attacking the person in a personal way instead of the argument or its evidence. Okay, so personal attack, what is that? Here's what it is. When a person, instead of presenting a logical counter-argument, someone attacks the person personally that made the argument itself, who presented the argument. So instead of presenting a logical counter-argument, one attacks the person who made the argument. Who presented, let's say, the argument. It may not be that they created it, but anyway. Okay, so in life, obviously, we don't always agree on everything, at least not 100% of people. And therefore, there's always going to be room for people to have differences of opinion, different arguments, different conclusions. So suppose that someone has given an argument about something and you don't agree with their conclusion. But instead of finding some kind of reason to reject it logically, like challenging the validity of their argument or interrogating whether their premises are true or whether they're supportive of the conclusion, suppose that somebody just makes a personal attack against the one who's presented this argument. So like imagine that this guy and this other guy, they're talking about global warming and they don't agree about the question. And one person says, look, if you just study the collected climate data from the past 150 years that we've been doing that, you're going to see that there's a huge spike in global temperature all clustered towards the current day. And that just shows a warming trend. And it tracks exactly with the rise of greenhouse gases being trapped by industrial processes. So don't you think, therefore, that global warming is real? We should do something about it? I mean, I showed you there's a bunch of evidence. Now, suppose that their opponent comes back and says this. Do you really think I'm going to listen to what you're saying? You don't know anything. Your breath smells horrible. I can smell from over here. So it's disgusting. You really need to brush your teeth. Your argument is invalid. Okay, now, what's wrong with that way of replying? That's not a counter argument to what the person said. That doesn't say, well, look, those pieces of data are somehow not accurate, or you're interpreting them incorrectly, or here I have other data which is more persuasive. Instead, it just got down to a personal insult and an attack. Suppose this person's breath does smell. Is that relevant? It's not relevant. So fallacies of relevance, you're getting the picture. When a person gives reasoning that doesn't help support their conclusion. So if this person's conclusion is global warming is not real, what does that have to do with someone's breath or the person themselves who's giving this other side of the argument? So when you don't agree with the conclusion or claim, you're supposed to attack the argument and the reasons given, not the person who's giving the argument, because that's sort of like attacking a target that's not relevant to the question that's being raised. So if a person says to you, like we're debating about policy maybe, one guy says, I think a border wall is a sensible measure to prevent drug trafficking and to control immigration, and someone else says, no, it's not. And so suppose they get into their back and forth. The other guy says, no, that's a foolish policy. It's a waste of money. And studies have shown that it actually doesn't have a measurable impact on the kind of drug trafficking that you're talking about. So suppose that at that point, the other person says to them, well, I mean, come on, I can't take it from a person like you. Look at the way you're dressed right now. I mean, your outfit is just, it's the worst looking thing I've ever seen. You really don't know how to even shop. And you're the one that's telling me that we need to get rid of the border wall? Come on. Well, look, whether this person's fashion choices are wise or not, this is totally irrelevant to the question of whether they're giving you sound evidence and reasoning towards their conclusion. So there's no problem with having debates and exchanging views. That's what we should do, and that's what we should hope for as critical thinkers, to have a productive meeting of the minds and come to a conclusion. But we're not supposed to get down into insults, name-calling, etc. Suppose that like a person, they've heard Dr. Fauci, at the CDC telling us that there's all these mitigation and distancing measures that we should take to try and prevent the widespread of the coronavirus until we have a safe vaccine that we can all take. So anyway, suppose someone's like, oh, you really believe this Fauci guy when he says that, it's a deadly virus? I watched him throw the first pitch at the World Series, and did you see him throw that baseball? He really couldn't throw it at all. It was the most pathetic toss. He didn't even go 5 feet, and it went trailing off to the left. It didn't even cross the home plate. So this guy, I don't believe anything he says once I saw him toss that baseball. Again, it's not relevant. Maybe a person that's not good at sports knows a lot of stuff about science. And so when you attack the person in some personal way that's not relevant to the claims they're making, you're doing the ad hominem, the personal attack, and that's wrong. let's give some examples from the book, just while we're on the topic. Some people say that there's two versions of ad hominem, the abusive and the circumstantial. So abusive is when you just directly attack the person, like, well, you don't know what you're talking about, you're ugly, or, your breath stinks, or, I heard that, your mom one time got in trouble with the law, so are you really, a person I can trust? These things are not relevant to the content of the argument. In another case, though, it's circumstantial, where you attack the person because of the circumstances they're in or their background. Like an example given in the book of that is, suppose that someone says to you, I think affirmative action is a reasonable policy when it comes to admissions and hiring because it counteracts the effects of bias and discrimination in hiring and admissions. If we don't have this kind of quota system, then leaving people to their own judgment, the effect of bias will cause inequality in the way that people are admitted. And now someone says back to them, okay, I don't agree with you, mister, because Raul, you're the one telling me this, and aren't you a Latino? So you're one that would benefit from these programs. So obviously, you're going to say that. Well, look, that's another ad hominem, because are you really attacking the principle that there's something good about affirmative action by just saying to this person, hey, you're one that could stand to benefit from it? If you don't think it's a wise policy, then you should talk about it on policy grounds, not attack the character of the person who's made the argument. When you deal with arguments, you really ought to think about them as though they come from an anonymous source. It doesn't matter who said it. What is their appearance, background, manner of speech, dress, and so forth. You just look at the argument as like a set of sentences, a piece of logic, and you evaluate it on those grounds. So we got to stay above board, not get down into the gutter. The problem is that a lot of times when people start hitting us with their personal attacks, being defensive and, wanting to defend ourselves, a lot of times that brings us down to the same level. So once somebody starts saying to you, a personal attack, it's very tempting to reply in kind and do the same thing. But by the time we do that, we're no longer being reasonable and we're no longer acting logically. We're just getting into mutual accusations, insults, and being hostile. That's kind of mentioned in the book also. So here it says, suppose Pat and Chris are having a debate over the lovely topic of abortion, and Pat says, I think it's wrong because it ends the life of a human being. And Chris says, come on, you pro-life people are just a bunch of religious fanatics and you're narrow-minded. And Pat's like, oh yeah? So, well, you know what? You're a baby-killing Nazi. What do you think about that? So look, what started off as a possible debate about the legality and morality of the policy of abortion has totally gone off the rails and descended into name-calling and even worse. So, you see this on social media a lot. Sometimes you see it in the media and even in politics. So we want to be a little bit better than that. This is a well-known fallacy, so it's much understood and discussed over the generations, over the centuries. Let's try our best to hold ourselves to higher standards and just be fair-minded when we consider people's arguments. No need to insult or attack people. Okay, so I guess that's good enough. Personal attack fallacy. We move on to the next. So the next one then in the list is the appeal to force fallacy. In our book, they say that this can also be sometimes referred to by a different title. And so the alternative label or title of appeal to force is scare tactics. So the appeal to force / scare tactic fallacy, what is this? Okay, it's pretty simple to say. It's just when a person uses or threatens to use force of some kind to get another person to back down or to accept their position. So the use or threat of force to get someone to back down and accept one's position. Accept one's position, accept one's viewpoint. Okay, so like for example, suppose that you're having a little back and forth dialogue, debate with one of your parents, and you and your parent don't agree on some topic. So like, I don't know, you're having this political debate with your parents about whether or not we should cut military funding to pay for more social programs. And like, say you believe in that. You think that the military budget is too big and our social programs, roads, bridges, and all that stuff are also underfunded. So you think that we should rebalance some of our budgetary priorities. And you make a sound, reasonable argument. But suppose that really goes against the grain with your parent and they say this to you. You know, I'm so tired of you giving me all these arguments, whatever you're learning over there in college or whatever, it's just frustrating. So look, just don't forget who pays your tuition, all right? You know what I'm saying? Now, if your parent says to you, you better stop thinking those things and saying those things because don't forget who pays your tuition, what's the threat? Let me just ask you that, just checking in with you guys for a moment. Just take a sip of this drink. So what's the implied threat in that case, perhaps? I can imagine other possible scenarios besides this, but just for one example, what do you think? Yeah, that they won't pay, right? So that they'll revoke or withdraw the financial support for the student's college experience. Or, you know, another case, you better stop saying that stuff because, you know, who pays the bills in this house? Or, you know, I don't want people in this household to think those things. So look, is the person, that parent in our example, giving a counter argument? Are they telling you, no, that's not correct? Because if you really do consider it, here are the logical reasons as to why that policy is necessary and appropriate. Instead, they're just trying to use leverage against you of some kind of threat or intimidation. Sometimes the threat of force is not physical force, but the withdrawal of some kind of affection or favors or arrangement with another person. In some cases, it is literal threat of force. Like, you know, you tell somebody, you know, I believe that we really need to, I don't know, change our agricultural production methods and stop relying on so many of the genetically modified crops. And for some reason, your parents, that's just a pet issue for them. And they just say, you know what, I'm going to slap you in the face if you say that again. It doesn't need to be your parent either. It could be, I mean, I'm going with that because you guys have a lot of experience with parents and stuff, but it could just be anybody in everyday life or society, you know, so stop saying that before I smack you. In that case, the threat of hurt, of harm and force is not a logical appeal to reasons. It's basically just telling the person, I'm going to get violent, basically, if you don't back away from saying that or if you don't adopt my position. So yeah, like obviously force and making people scared, scare tactics is a way to sometimes get people in line with what you want them to say or do, but it's not a very effective way to argue. I mean, if you have to threaten people and use the threat of force or even real force to get people to hold the views that you have, does that really make it seem like you have confidence in your own position, like you could argue for it and defend it? If you really had good reasons, then you wouldn't need to appeal to force because you could simply state the reasons and convince someone using logic. So anybody that has to resort to force, in my view, it looks like they have got a losing argument. It's kind of like a last resort when you've run out of reasons to give. So you just start, you know, getting aggressive, mean, and nasty towards other people. There's no need for that. When we're just discussing arguments and ideas and our different views, nobody needs to threaten, force, or make people scared. Why would you be so interested and invested in having 100% agreement with all your views anyway? If you can defend them and reason them out, more power to you, but no need for force. Now, let me say this, though, before I move on. Sometimes, if you give a person a scary-sounding warning, it's not necessarily an appeal to force if the thing that you're warning them about isn't related to your own behavior. So if I say to somebody, look, you're about to drive drunk, what are you doing? That's very dangerous. If you get behind the wheel right now, you could easily cause an accident and hurt yourself or hurt other people. So I'm just telling you it's not wise. Now, am I giving them, is that an appeal to force? No, because I'm not telling them I'm going to hurt you if you do something or say something that I don't agree with. I'm just telling them that your own behavior is likely on its own to lead to some kind of destructive outcome that you would not like. So in that case, since I'm not the source of the threat that they may face, I'm not making an appeal to force. I'm just warning them. Okay, so that's like a different case. Okay, guys, so we've got two of those then. Appeal to force is, I hope, clear enough. So we go ahead next to the appeal to pity fallacy. Appeal to pity, some have called it appeal to emotion, but let's go with the textbook's usage. Appeal to pity. It's simply when pity is invoked in an argument when it is irrelevant to the conclusion. Okay, so pity is invoked in an argument, but it's not relevant to the conclusion or to the circumstances at hand. One kind of easy enough example is take the case of like a traffic stop where a person is getting ticketed for going beyond a speed limit. So let's say they're significantly beyond that speed limit, and the officer is telling them, "Sorry, but I have to ticket you today. You were going 20 miles beyond the posted sign limit." And now suppose that this is your reply to them. "But officer, please, could you just give me a break and let me offer the warning? My friend the other day, their dog died, and it's been a really tough time for both of us, and I've been dealing with all the emotional stress and anxiety of that, and so it's just been one of the worst weeks because of that event. If I get this ticket, it's going to be so much even worse. So, can you show me some pity and feel pity for me? This is a tough, rough situation I'm dealing with." Okay, well, no disrespect to those going through anything difficult, but the thing is it really relevant, though, to the question of whether they were in violation of the traffic law? Perhaps not. So if you have a trivial kind of reason and you're asking for like special consideration or treatment, some kind of show of pity, oftentimes this is in the realm of fallacy. So like in the book, "Please don't give me a speeding ticket, officer. I had a really bad day. I just found out that my partner was cheating on me. To top it off, I just received an eviction notice." Those are sad things. Those are things, I guess, to pity a person for. But in the case given, it's not really relevant to the question overall, which is whether the law was violated. Sometimes as a professor, I am witness to different appeal to pity cases. A student will sometimes ask for an extension or to have an assignment substituted for something that they missed. And if the reason given for it is comparatively insignificant or trivial, then I would say that's an appeal to pity. Like if someone says, "Oh, I was watching a movie the other day and it was so depressing that it shook me up all weekend and I couldn't focus on my work. So can I get an extension?" Maybe that's an appeal to pity. The book gives another example. I didn't have time to type up my assignment for class because I promised my friend that I'd meet them at the movies. And you know how it is with promises. You're not supposed to let your friends down and flake on the things that you say you would do. So could I turn it in late, or could someone else type it up for me? Because I don't want to fail the course, but please just show me some pity or sympathy. I don't know, another example there. Now, one more thing, though, before I move on from the appeal to pity, is that sometimes when you ask a person for a special exemption to rules or to be treated with special concern or consideration, it's not always a fallacy. The case where it would not be a fallacy is if the circumstances are grave and serious enough. So take the same traffic stop. Cop pulls a person over. "You're going too fast. I'm going to ticket you." Well, what if they say not just, "Oh, I don't know, I'm having a bad week," but "No, this is an emergency. Behind me in this back seat, there's a toddler. They're choking right now. They're choking on, like, I don't know, they swallowed a penny or something. They're turning blue. I couldn't wait to have the ambulance pick us up and take us to the ER. So that's why I'm speeding through traffic signs and going really fast, because it's an utter emergency. You got to let us go." Now, in that case, if you're the cop, it's reasonable to probably say, "All right, well, the normal rule, let's just set aside for the moment because we have life and death right now hanging in the balance." If I'm a professor or whatever, and I am, and the person says to me, "I'm sorry, professor, I couldn't turn in this assignment because I got hit yesterday by like a bus, and now I've got a broken leg. I'm in the ER. I'm in the ICU." For me to say to that person, "Oh, come on, don't hit me with your pity party, little you want me to feel sorry for you, you still got to turn it in. That would be totally unreasonable on my part. So obviously at a certain level of concern, seriousness, gravity, a request for special treatment is not necessarily unmerited. So you just got to be able to distinguish the two kind of cases. And the basic rule is whether it's a serious case of something that merits the deviation from the rule. Okay, so that's appeal to pity. You also sometimes see appeal to pity in the way that advertisers and marketers market products to us. Like sometimes they'll try and sell you a product by telling you that you should feel sorry for somebody if you don't buy it. Like sometimes, I don't know, charitable aid organizations might try to induce pity as a way of selling something, or in other cases, commercial products might make you want to think that it's a good thing to buy it because they have some kind of worthy cause that they also support. And so that's part of the sales pitch. Anyway, guys, so appeal to pity. Next up then, we have popular appeal. So far it's been ad hominem, force, pity. Okay, popular appeal is next. Okay, popular appeal, from the name of it, I'm sure you can guess what this one sort of is about. With a popular appeal, a person appeals to popular opinion to support their claim or conclusion. Okay. Textbook's wording, my wording. Okay. Popular appeal. One appeals to popular opinion in order to support or to gain support, to add support to their conclusion. So it's not a good way to argue that something is true, correct, or right just because most people think so or that it's popular. Imagine if you watched or you were looking online to see a movie review and you just didn't know whether this was a movie you wanted to watch. So, you're looking at the film criticism that's out there and you read this one film critic and they're like, the movie is #1 in the box office, therefore it's the best. Done. Easy review. Is that a good review? Well, I mean, some, of course, movies that are #1 in the box office might be critically acclaimed and be great films. But obviously there's more to arguing that it's good than just saying everyone's watching it. Anybody who's a little bit of artistic elite would say that in many cases what most people like is actually unsophisticated, vapid, banal. Like these Transformer movies, are they really great cinematic achievements that are going to stand the test of time? They're not exactly Oscar worthy, but they make so much money. So you can argue that just because something's popular does not mean that it's the best. If it's the best, then there's an argument to be given why it's the best. That doesn't just mention that it's popular. So like if you say, oh, iPhones are the best because everyone has an iPhone when you compare it to Android. Maybe iPhone is better than Android, but if it is, then you'd be able to make the case for that on independent grounds. You'd talk about its features, you talk about its ease of use, the quality of its camera, the way that it's, able to be integrated into the whole system of other Apple products quite easily. Or some of its proprietary apps, FaceTime and all of that, things that you don't have on Android. But just saying, oh, it's the most popular, so it's obviously the best, that is another case of appeal to popularity, popular appeal. Sometimes the things that are the most popular are not necessarily the best. Like if you go back in history, previous historical time periods, maybe the popular opinion would have been women shouldn't be allowed to vote. I mean, in 1920, we changed the Constitution to give women the right to vote, and it's hard to imagine that people mostly thought at some point that they shouldn't be. But that would have been a popular view that I think is wrong, or thinking that slavery was acceptable during previous times in history when it might have been a popular idea. The book gives this example, which I thought was interesting. Someone says they believe in God, and you're like, okay, well, cool, what's the argument that you have? What is the best argument that God exists? And they say, easy enough. Just look at the majority. Majority of people believe in him, so therefore he exists. Well, it's true that the majority of people believe in God. and they're follow some type of religion. But that's not a good argument that God exists. A good argument that God exists just talks about the reasons why you think God is real. And there are plenty of those. There's the cosmological argument, argument from design, ontological argument, Pascal's wager. There's a lot of classical arguments to try and prove that God exists. But just saying he must exist because most people think so, that's another case of a popular appeal. They give this example in the book. Mandatory testing of students is a good policy because we polled the parents, and 71% of the parents favor that policy. Well, just because it's a popular thing that parents think is popular doesn't necessarily mean that education experts would agree that this is the best way to organize schooling and evaluation of students. Sometimes popular appeal is seen in commercials and advertising when a popular celebrity figure is the endorsement sponsor of the product. So you see LeBron James drinking a Pepsi or something. Wow, Pepsi is a great drink because LeBron James drinks it. So in this case, the popular appeal is appealing to the popularity of the endorsement sponsor that is a well-known person. But whether something's good or not isn't just to be determined on the basis of its overall popularity or on the basis of the popularity of those that stand in support of it or that endorse it. So we need to keep in mind that a particular position or conclusion is not always right just because the majority or some elite group accepts it. We have to think for ourselves. And sometimes those popular things are justifiable and they can be defended on the basis of good reasons. But other times they aren't. I don't know, if fashion trends, you see this sometimes as well. Suppose that someone tells you that Nike Air Force One is the best shoe. And why? Because it's a very popular shoe. I mean, it's true that it's very popular. I've never actually owned the Air Force One. I keep thinking about finally getting one just to kind of add to my collection. The thing is, though, I don't know, it's a little, to me, sometimes boring and basic. It's just white. But, it's a classic silhouette. It's kind of cool. I don't know. The thing is, though, is it just popular and that's why people like it? Or is it something about the shoe that's really great? If there's something great about it, people should appeal to those reasons. But just saying, gotta get it because everyone has it and that's why it's great, I don't know. It could just be a trend. Okay, then. So anyways, but no disrespect. I have a lot of Nike shoes, so if you're an Air Force One person, it's all good. I'm just trying to come up with examples that maybe you can relate to. Okay, then. So we're moving ahead from popular appeal to the next fallacy of relevance, which is appeal to ignorance. Okay. All right, guys, is everything good to go? I just want to check in with you for a minute. I know a lot of this today is just me kind of going through examples, definitions, explanations, but making sure that we're all good and that you're engaged and all of that. So things are well. Can you think of an example of a popular appeal? Maybe you can. Thanks, Nicole. Appreciate that. Nicole, has your screen image changed? Because now I see you have an icon instead of just the letter N. Okay, thanks, Gabriel. Cool. Or are there two Nicole Guzmans? Probably not, but anyway, just notice that. Okay, guys, so let's just continue, I guess. Next up, we have appeal to ignorance. Okay, no problem. That's good, Nicole. So yeah, appeal to ignorance fallacy. What is that? Well, the appeal to ignorance, another interesting case. This is one that you argue that something is true just because it has not been proven false. Okay, so something is true simply because no one has proven it false. Okay, so that is a fallacy. That's called appeal to ignorance. So with appeal to ignorance, a person is trying to make the case that something is true, but what is their evidence? The evidence that the person gives with this fallacy is simply the idea that no one has proven otherwise. No one's proven that it's false. But that is not by itself proof. When you have evidence or proof, it is supposed to be positive evidence that supports the claim. It's not supposed to be just the absence of contrary evidence. So like, for example, what if there's a relationship between two people and one person says to the other, you know, you're cheating on me. And they say, no, I'm not. What do you mean? They're like, well, here's my evidence. You can't prove that you're not. You know, you cannot prove to me that you're not. So I think that that's proof that you are. Now, how could a person prove a negative, right? What are you supposed to do to prove a negative? That's almost impossible to do. You know, prove that something's not the case. Another possibility, someone says, you know, there's alien life out there somewhere in space. And you're like, really? Well, what makes you think that? Or what argument would you go with? And they said, well, my basic thinking is this. No one can prove there's no aliens, so there must be. Is that really proof, though? The fact that no one's proved that there aren't? First of all, it'd be impossible to prove there's no such thing as extraterrestrial life because you'd have to survey and canvass the entire physical universe and then determine, based on the thorough audit of all of space and time, that there's no such thing, which could not be done. So what would be proof that there's extraterrestrial life? Actual evidence that confirms it. So like if the Mars rover starts beaming back pictures of little footprints and stuff on the surface of Mars, or we see, you know, like little life forms buzzing around over there, then that would be evidence, clear evidence that there's such life that's not on the planet Earth. But it's not evidence, just the fact that it's not been conclusively disproven. If that was the way to prove things, then I could sit here and claim to prove all kinds of ridiculous stuff. I could say, you know, there have to be leprechauns at the end of the rainbow, because can anybody prove that they're not there? I don't think anyone's been able to prove that that's not true. So there must be, or there has to be a Sasquatch, a Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster, because no one can prove they don't exist. You know, so when you need to make proof of something, you have to have actual evidence and not just the absence of contrary evidence. Now, there's one exception to this that I guess I'd like to mention, and it has to do with law. So when you're in a court of law and you've been accused of a crime, we say that in the legal standard in our system is innocent until proven guilty. And you might think, well, isn't that appeal to ignorance? Like, I'm innocent unless you can prove that I'm not. Well, okay. In the law, though, we hold the government to a higher standard of proof. We have to make it so that the government has to really overwhelmingly prove a case against the citizen to deprive them of basic things like their liberty and rights and their freedom of movement. So because of how important we cherish and prize our liberties, we don't want to make it too easy for the government to be able to jail us. So we give the presumption of innocence under the law. But in life, in just everyday life, we don't give the presumption of truth to a claim without actual proof of the claim. So that's a difference. You know, in law, we can say, well, you're innocent until proven guilty. But we shouldn't say in life, you know, you're a cheater until you can prove that you're not, you know, or there's aliens until you can prove that they don't exist. So hopefully that makes sense to you guys. It's because of the stakes involved in the concept of like freedom and liberty in jurisprudence that we hold the evidential standard of prosecution and trial at a different epistemic level than what would be reasonable in the course of just ordinary life. Okay, so it's not a good enough reason to think that there's aliens, just that no one's proven otherwise. But legally speaking, if we can't make conclusive proof that someone's guilty, we'll grant them the benefit of the doubt under the law. And we put the burden of proof on the state instead of the person to prove their innocence. Okay, so then, appeal to ignorance, guys. I don't know if there's much more in there from the book. Yeah, that's good. Okay. Yeah, like, I remember, you know, one thing that's kind of funny with the whole appeal to ignorance, if you remember the war in Iraq that the U.S. started back in 2003, shortly after the 9/11 attacks, you know, like what the Bush administration, W. Bush administration was saying was, okay, Iraq, we think they're building weapons of mass destruction, but we didn't really give them a chance to prove that they weren't. You know, we didn't allow international weapons inspectors in there. So it's kind of like you put them in an impossible situation. We said, we think you have these weapons until it can be proven that you don't, but we didn't give them the opportunity to make such a proof. I don't know, just kind of a random political example that came to mind. We go on to the next, and that's hasty generalization. Okay, so hasty generalization. of the fallacies of relevance. This is a fallacy that happens when a person makes a universal claim. That's what a generalization is. It's an all statement, like all crows are black or something. But the problem with these type of arguments is that the person makes a universal claim like that, but they're doing it based on a sample size or a sample that is either too small or is not representative, biased, or skewed. So okay, hasty generalization. When we make a universal claim, but we're doing that based on a sample that is too small or is just not representative. So generalization is an all claim, like all dogs go to heaven or something. And then hasty just means being too fast. So hasty generalization is like jumping too quickly to the conclusion of an all statement based on limited evidence or unrepresentative evidence. So here's some cases mentioned in the book to give you examples. Suppose that someone reports this type of experience and they give this argument. They say, so growing up as a kid, my father was abusive to me. Then later on, when I was an adult, I had a relationship and my boyfriend was also abusive to me. So you know what? Therefore, all men are abusive. That's it. They're just abusive. I mean, my dad and my boyfriend. So there you go. Now, what's the problem with the argument? It's a sweeping generalization about all men, but it's based on just a couple of experiences. And can we really generalize that quickly off of these two experiences? It's sad, of course, for anybody to be a victim of abuse, but to make a claim of all, you need extraordinary evidence, because that is the most sweeping kind of claim that one can make. When you say all men are this way, that doesn't mean most. It doesn't mean some. It means 100% all. So you can't base a claim like that off of just a few given examples. And the same could be said on the other hand. When I was young, my mom cheated on my dad and left him. And then when I was, in some of my early relationships, my girlfriends would all cheat on me. So I think women are just unfaithful. Again, one cannot base a couple of experiences, whether or not that's reflective of their own, life, to the general case overall. Here's some more examples mentioned in the book. So someone said, a college education is the great equalizer when it comes to class in the United States, because talk show host Oprah Winfrey, Starbucks founder Howard Schultz, and Kenny Trout, the founder of Excel, all three of them came from very poor families, but they put themselves through college and now they're all billionaires. So that means that anyone in this country can start off poor and become a billionaire. Well, this is a general claim about everyone's opportunity to become that rich based on three cases. But the book, expands upon that and says this statement is a hasty generalization based on only a handful of cases. In fact, while 77% of young people from rich families graduate from college, only 9% from poor families earn a college degree, which is intensifying the gap between the rich and the poor, which is already at a 30-year high. So, the American dream and how much opportunity is available to all of us maybe is a bit overstated, I guess, according to the textbook's discussion, by referring to only three examples and then making the sweeping claim based on that. So in general, you have to wait for very, very good evidence whenever you make a sweeping generalization. Sometimes people use stereotypical thinking. They've had a few experiences with a person or type of people, and then they just generalize off of those experiences to all members of that group. So before you make a generalization, make sure that you have a sufficiently large and unbiased sample. The other thing, so they mentioned, this is funny. After the death of great English poet Lord Byron in 1824, a physician removed his brain and weighed it, and he found that the brain of Byron, the poet, was 25% larger than the average size human brain. So the news of this discovery spread throughout the scientific community based on a single sample, and that contributed to the myth that there's a connection between brain size and high intelligence. So the person said, in all cases, when the brain is bigger, it trends towards more intelligence, based on one example of a well-known poet that seemed to have a slightly larger brain. That's not systematic. That's not something that can be generalized from. And so another fair example of the hasty generalization fallacy. Sometimes we like to simplify things. We like to just say all those things are that way. But those are some of the least safe and accurate claims that we can make in most cases. So it's better to usually speak in more measured terms and to talk on a case-by-case basis. But when we're willing to make generalizations, we need abundant and totally incontroverted evidence. Okay. Yeah, I was going to mention this too, unrepresentative sample. Suppose that someone says, college students, they're all conservative, because if you just look at me and my friends, we were in college and they were all conservative. Well, the person's own sample of friends there's like a selection bias. You're the one who selects your friends. So obviously, if you have like some type of political leaning, whether it's liberal, conservative, or whatever, then that's going to be reflected probably in the choice you make of which friends. So if you're generalizing from the self-selected set of friends that you have to like all college students, then there may be a mismatch between the representation that can offer to the full body, make the full composition and makeup of that group of people. Okay, so then there's two more in the set of fallacies that I talked about at the beginning, the fallacies of relevance here. So we've gone through 6 out of 8. I'm debating in my mind how much of the remaining 2 to go through. I don't want to necessarily rush those 2, but I guess looking at the time, there are 5 minutes, so probably I can at least talk about the straw man and get that at least on the table. And I guess on Tuesday I'll have to finish with red herrings. So I'll make a slight delay to the due date of homework 2. I'll probably assign it to you guys over the next day, so I'll send you your titanium announcement, which contains the instructions on it. The only piece of information that you'll be waiting to hear from me, it's in the book, and I'll also add notes on it in the message, but that will have to do with red herring. So we'll be fine to go, and your second homework will still be due next week, but maybe not on Thursday morning. I might extend it into Friday. But back to this. Straw man, the next one. So the straw man fallacy is when you take your opponent's actual argument and then you misrepresent it or distort it so that it seems easier to disprove or to refute. So when you distort or misrepresent an opponent's argument in order to make it seem easier to refute. Okay, when you distort or misrepresent your opponent's argument to make it seem easier to refute, to rebut. So this happens a lot, unfortunately. I see this on like social media. I see it on Twitter. I see it in political speech and sometimes in the media. So what sometimes happens is that a person gives a reasonable sounding argument, but then their opponent reports back a totally over sensationalized or oversimplified version of the same argument, so that it sounds way crazier than the person's actual argument was. And then they reply to that misrepresented version of it. Okay, so suppose that one person said, I think when it comes to drug laws in our country, we really should look at federally legalizing marijuana, because compared to the narcotic drugs, it doesn't have the same kind of potential for abuse, addiction, erratic behavior, impairment, and it might even have certain medicinal benefits. So I think we should just revisit our laws concerning that substance at least. Now, suppose that someone's reply is this. Wait, let me understand. What did you just say? You said we should legalize all the drugs? How is that okay? I mean, then we're going to have people smoking crack at work. I mean, how are people going to keep jobs, raise kids, finish school? It'll just be a total chaotic and just insane society if we did that. So clearly your argument is invalid. Now, what's wrong with that reply? Did you hear the sort of back and forth? The first person made a much more reasonable and measured argument about one controlled substance, but the reply mischaracterized their view as though what they were really saying is, let's like full-blown legalize all the drugs, including the worst, most hardcore addictive narcotics. So you can understand that would be a straw man. That's not responding to the real argument, but a overhyped and exaggerated version of it that makes it sound more radical. Or what if somebody says, I'm giving you examples, right? But another possible example could be, I think that this border policy is just very costly, it's ineffective, they're hard to maintain, and so therefore I just don't see it as a wise way to control the flow of immigration and drugs. And somebody says, okay, so what you're saying is have total open borders, just no controls at all. People could just walk in no matter what, whether they're here or not, whether they're a citizen, no matter who they are, whether they have a record. Is that reasonable or sensible? That sounds out of control. So no borders, no controls, I can't agree with you. But did the person say that? No, they just said that one border control policy that had never been implemented in the United States history is not effective. And now they're being misrepresented as a person who believes there should be no such thing as immigration policies or rules whatsoever. Or, we could go all day with this stuff. Last one, because I know we're out of time. Someone says genetically modified crops. I think that that's not a good way to produce agriculture in our country. We should have a more healthy and sustainable way of doing that. And someone says, what? So no farming? You're telling us we should not grow vegetables and fruit? Come on, we're going to starve then. Or somebody says we should cut the military budget a little because we spend too much on it compared to our domestic priorities. And then someone says, so what, no more military? Then in that case, we'll never even be able to defend ourselves and we won't even have a country. So that's a crazy idea. In all these examples, what I'm saying is that the real argument is a lot more reasonable, well-stated, and moderate. And then the straw man response is not replying to that, but a different version of the actual argument. Now, why is it called straw man? It's supposed to bring images to your mind of like a scarecrow, which is a literal man made out of straw. And the point of that metaphor is that when you attack a person by straw man, you're not attacking the real person's argument, you're attacking this like fake version of what they said, this like zombie scarecrow version of their actual argument. So make sure that you do your best to be charitable to other people. Try and take their argument in the most reasonable and rational way that it could have been intended, so that no one can accuse you of deviating from the real content that they said so as to present a straw man. Okay, and if people do that to you, that's definitely what you have to point out. Like, don't misrepresent my argument. That's not what I said. That's a straw man. You're taking it out of context or making it sound worse. Okay, then. So that's enough for us today. We got through 7 out of 8 of these, so I think we actually did pretty well. Thanks so much, guys, for all your attendance and your hard work. I'll be sending off instructions for that second homework. It'll be due at the end of next week, and it's going to have to do with these fallacies of relevance specifically. So hold on for the announcement in the next day or so, and I guess I'll let you guys go. So everything's good? Let me see. If so, let me hear in the chat that we're all good for today. Just before I close our stream. Okay, guys, thanks so much again. I appreciate it. And if you need anything, just let me know and I'll be in touch. You can email me whenever. All right, then. So have a great weekend, and I'll see you soon on the other end. Bye-bye.